My mother had just left the house that day. The atmosphere in my stepfather's house was eerily quiet. Assuming he had already left for work, I went out without paying much attention. After breakfast, as usual, I began to tidy up the kitchen and wash the remaining dishes. The only sounds that broke the silence were the running water from the tap and the clinking of dishes as I worked. I was so absorbed in my work that I didn't notice someone approaching from behind. Suddenly, a rough hand slipped around my waist and squeezed tightly. My whole body stiffened in shock at the unexpected touch. His breath was harsh and ragged, uncomfortably close to my ear. "Calm down," he whispered, but his words only sent shivers down my spine. Panic set in as I struggled to free myself, but his grip was too strong. Fear surged through me, accompanied by a flood of panicked questions. The once familiar kitchen suddenly felt suffocating and claustrophobic, making it hard to breathe. From that moment on, my haunting nightmare began. Hello, everyone. My name is Amelia, and I am 22 years old. I am telling this as my story. I've lived with my mother all my life. My father died when I was very young, leaving my mother, Grace, to raise me on her own. She was a strong, resilient woman who made countless sacrifices to ensure I had a loving and nurturing childhood. Despite the challenges, she taught me to be independent and steadfast in the face of adversity. I used to think we were the only ones with challenges. Things changed when I turned 18. For the first time, my mother confided in me that she had met someone special. She said that their relationship had become serious and that she wanted to take things further. I was stunned by this revelation because my mother had paid little attention to love since my father's death. But this time she seemed different. Her eyes sparkled and there was a constant smile on her lips. She wanted me to meet him and formally introduce him as a member of our family. When I first met Damien, my future stepfather, I was taken aback. He was tall, youthful, and charming, with a dazzling smile and striking blue eyes that could captivate anyone at first glance. Damien didn't look like my mother's partner. He seemed more like her equal, maybe even my brother or friend. Despite his elegance and charisma, I couldn't understand why someone like Damien, a man barely older than me, would choose my mother, a woman in her 40s. Although my mother was undeniably beautiful, the difference in their ages puzzled me. I tried to hide my discomfort so as not to upset my mother, but as time went on, doubts began to creep in. I couldn't help but ask myself, why him, Mum? Why did someone so young and attractive choose you? Could he have ulterior motives? My mother dismissed my concerns with a stern tone. "Amelia, don't say things like that. Damien loves me, and that's all that matters. Age doesn't define love." I wanted to believe her, but there was something wrong with Damien. He was always polite and attentive to my mother. He cooked, cleaned, and helped around the house in a way I had rarely seen men do. But the way he looked at me, there was something disturbing in his eyes. It wasn't the protective look of a stepfather. It was something much more disturbing. It was hard to explain, but something didn't feel right. I told myself that I was probably overthinking things and that I needed to give Damien a chance. After all, he had proved himself to my mother, and their relationship seemed to bring her happiness. After only a few months of dating, Damien married my mother and quickly became an official member of our family. His presence changed everything in our little house. Family meals were never the same. There was always a tension in the air, an awkwardness I couldn't shake. I avoided expressing my discomfort because I didn't want to upset my mother. She was so happy and trusted Damien completely, seeing him as the man who had brought her joy and comfort after years of loneliness. I didn't want to rob her of that happiness, but deep down I couldn't help but wonder, did this man really love her, or was there something hidden behind his perfect smile? Over time, I got used to Damien's presence. Although I was shy and awkward around him at first, I couldn't deny that he brought a certain positivity to our household. He helped my mother with the housework, cooked meals and maintained a polite, proper demeanour. My mother's joy was undeniable, and things seemed to be stabilizing. I began to wonder if my initial doubts about Damien were just unfounded paranoia. But then something happened that rekindled my suspicions. One evening, after a hard day at school, I came home to relax. I hadn't had a chance to do my laundry, so I hung some of my underwear in the bathroom, intending to wash them with the rest of my clothes the next morning. After my shower, I wrapped myself in a towel and went out to find some fresh clothes. When I returned to the bathroom to get my underwear, I realized it was gone. At first I froze, confused. Maybe I had left them somewhere else, I thought. I began to search the bathroom, opening cupboard doors and even bending down to look under the sink, but it was nowhere to be found. To reassure myself, I went back to my bedroom and rummaged through my pile of clothes and drawers, but the missing underwear wasn't there either. A strange, unsettling feeling crept over me. I was sure I had hung it in the bathroom before I showered. How could it have just disappeared? After changing, I went into the living room where my mum and Damien were watching television. They seemed perfectly normal. My mum was relaxed and laughing at a comedy scene on the screen. I hesitated, but finally asked, "Mum, Dad, has anyone else come into the house?" They both looked at me in surprise. "Why do you ask?" my mother replied. I hesitated, not wanting to sound too serious. "It's nothing, just a personal item. My underwear was hanging in the bathroom and now it's missing." Damien chuckled slightly and shook his head. "No one went in there. Maybe you left it somewhere else," he said casually. My mum nodded in agreement. "Try to remember, Amelia. You could have misplaced it." "I sat here the whole time," Damien added. "No one went anywhere near the bathroom." I nodded, tried to brush it off and went back to my room. But as I sat on my bed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Could I have misplaced it? The uneasy feeling gnawed at me. It didn't make sense. From that day on, the memory of my missing underwear stayed with me. No matter how hard I tried to dismiss it, the unsettling feeling refused to go away. I couldn't explain it, nor could I pinpoint where it was coming from, but it felt like an invisible eye was following me everywhere. At first I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it was all in my head. After the incident with my missing underwear, I thought maybe I had become overly sensitive. But it wasn't just that. Something felt deeply wrong. The strange things didn't go away, they just got more disturbing. The first time I noticed something truly bizarre was while taking a shower. The bathroom door was made of frosted glass, and from the inside, you could only see vague shapes of something on the other side. From the outside, you could only see a blurred silhouette of the person inside. At first, I paid little attention to it, but as the days went by, strange things began to happen. Occasionally, while taking a shower, I would feel a shadow passing by the door, just a faint movement at the edge of my vision. The first time it happened, I dismissed it as a lighting trick. One evening, however, the experience became impossible to ignore. I had just stepped into the bathroom and turned on the hot water. As I relaxed under the spray, I suddenly noticed a shadowy figure standing just outside the frosted glass door. My heart pounded in my chest and my breath caught in my throat. "Who's there?" I called softly, but there was no answer. Plucking up courage, I moved closer to the door to get a better look, but the figure was gone. I opened the door to check the corridor outside, but it was empty. The only thing I could see was the faint glow of light coming from the living room. I stood there for a moment, listening intently. There was no sound, just an unsettling silence that seemed to go on forever. I told myself it must have been a reflection, perhaps caused by the steam or the lighting, but the feeling of unease didn't leave me. In fact, it began to spread. Over the next few days, the feeling of being watched became constant. No part of the house felt safe. Every time I walked down the hallway, I had this eerie feeling. I would turn around to see if someone was behind me, only to find the hallway empty and cold. Sitting alone in the living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching me. Occasionally I would catch a glimpse, a shadow slipping through the window, a figure lurking in the corner of my vision. Every time I turned to look, everything was perfectly still, as if nothing had happened. During the day, I tried to rationalize. It's just your imagination, I told myself. Maybe it was the light outside or some random shadows creating illusions. But at night, when the house fell silent and the rooms were engulfed in darkness, the feeling grew stronger. Every step I took seemed to echo unnaturally, as if someone else's movements were mirroring mine. Late at night, I'd be lying awake in my room, trying to read or fall asleep, when I'd hear faint sounds outside my door, soft footsteps that stopped just outside my room. I got up several times to check, but the corridor was always empty. All the doors to the other rooms were shut. Each time I returned to bed, the unease remained, refusing to let me rest. I didn't share these feelings with anyone. I knew that if I told my mother, she would brush it off and scold me for being too sensitive. She would say, "You're overthinking things," and dismiss it without a second thought. As for Damien, he remained calm and collected, as if he hadn't noticed. But deep down I couldn't help feeling that something was wrong. As usual, there was no sign of anything unusual. Damien's calm remained unnervingly perfect, which made me feel even stranger. His demeanor was so calm that I couldn't read anything into it. As time passed, my unease didn't go away. Instead, it grew, gnawing at me. Then it happened again. My underwear disappeared. That night, after a shower, I dressed and stepped out of the bathroom. I stood in front of the mirror in the living room and slowly dried my still wet hair with a towel. The warm, cozy feeling after a long day was starting to settle in, and I was about to return to the bathroom to brush my teeth. Suddenly, the bathroom door opened. Damien stepped out, neatly dressed and holding a towel. He smiled softly and said, "I was just getting a towel for your mum." I nodded as usual and walked on, not thinking much of it. But when I went back into the bathroom, something felt wrong. I looked around and immediately noticed that the underwear I had hung on the rack earlier was gone. I searched the whole bathroom, from the laundry basket to every nook and cranny, but it was gone. A wave of confusion and unease washed over me. My mind raced to recall every detail of the evening. Then my thoughts turned to Damien. He had just been in the bathroom. What was he doing there? I tried to calm myself. He was just getting a towel for Mum, I thought. But the coincidence gnawed at me. Why had my underwear disappeared just as he came out? I didn't say anything, but my doubts began to harden. From that moment on, Damien became the center of my attention. Every move he made, every look, every word. I silently scrutinized it all. But Damien seemed to notice. Every time I watched him, he remained calm and well-behaved. Instead of reassuring me, his composure only deepened my unease. Was he hiding something? Was there something sinister beneath that polite exterior? Things went on like this for days, until one Saturday it all began to unravel. It was my day off, so I stayed in while my mum and Damien went out. The morning began as usual. Damien was up early, preparing breakfast with my mum, smiling and acting as if nothing could be more ordinary. After breakfast, my mum rushed off to an appointment, leaving Damien and me alone in the house. Before she left, he turned to me and said, "I'm going to stay home and rest for a while. Call me if you need anything." I forced a polite smile and nodded, although a knot of unease was already tightening in my chest. Once alone, I cleared the dining table and began to tidy the house. The living room was eerily quiet, save for the faint sound of my footsteps echoing across the floor. Sunlight streamed in through the windows, casting a soft glow across the room. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As I bent down to pick up a few things to organize, I suddenly felt a rough hand slide around my waist from behind. It squeezed hard. I froze. My breath caught in my chest, and a wave of shock and fear paralyzed me. "Amelia, you're absolutely gorgeous," a voice whispered close to my ear, Damien's. My heart stopped beating. I tried to struggle, but his grip was too tight and relentless. "Let me go!" I shouted, my voice shaking with fear. He didn't react immediately. Instead, he chuckled, his warm breath fanning my neck. Panic surged through me. "I'm just playing," Damien whispered, his tone calm, but with something cold and threatening about it. His hand remained tightly around my waist, showing no intention of letting go. The suffocating closeness of his body and the roughness of his touch sent a wave of terror through me. I struggled harder, but his grip only tightened, as if taunting me, daring me to resist. "Stop it!" I shouted, my voice trembling with anger and fear. Damien didn't move. Instead, he leaned closer, his breath brushing against my neck, sending shivers down my spine. "You're so nervous, Amelia," he murmured, in a tone that was anything but playful. I screamed again, telling him to stop. My attempts to push him away were in vain. His grip was too strong, trapping me in a terrifying embrace. His dark eyes bored into mine, filled with something I didn't want to acknowledge. "You're stunningly beautiful," Damien said softly, his voice dripping with something that made my stomach churn. I froze. Everything around me seemed to fall apart. His arms tightened around me as I tried desperately to free myself, my defenses crumbling under his strength. "I've wanted you since the first moment I saw you," he said, in a low, raspy voice, each word piercing me like a dagger. I couldn't understand what I was hearing. My mind reeled. This was the man my mother trusted, the man she loved. "How could you even think of this? How could you do this to me, to my mother?" I managed to stammer, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. Damien stared at me, his expression shifting between inner turmoil and cold determination. Then, with a voice devoid of regret, he said, "Your mother isn't the one I always wanted. You are." His words hit me like a physical blow. My knees almost buckled as I tried to process the terrible truth. "Just this once, Amelia," he pleaded, his tone a mixture of desperation and something sinister. "I swear I won't hurt your mother. It'll be our secret." I screamed in rage. She struggled against his grip. "You despicable man! Who do you think you are?" But his strength overwhelmed me, his arms tightened, and his breath, so close to my ear, felt suffocating. My surroundings became blurred as my body weakened. I didn't understand why I couldn't fight anymore. Damien had taken control of the situation, of my strength, of my very will to resist. His words, his eyes, his touch, they had crossed every conceivable boundary. At that moment, my emotions were a complex mixture of fear, guilt, and confusion. I couldn't believe that I had allowed things to escalate to this point. I couldn't understand how things had gotten so out of control. Time seemed to crawl by, every second stretching into an eternity. I kept asking myself, how did this happen? When my mother returned home that evening, her expression of surprise is etched in my memory. But what she saw and how she reacted was something I wasn't prepared for. Damien was usually home before me. I was often late because of work. But today was different. My mother had just returned. She put her bag on the counter and looked at Damien with a curious expression. "You're home early today," she said, her tone light. "I usually see you back later." As always, Damien remained composed. He smiled gently and walked over, taking her bag. "I finished early today," he replied, his tone calm and reassuring. "I thought you'd like to have dinner together. You've been working so hard lately." His words were soft, kind, so reasonable that anyone else would have thought nothing of them. But I couldn't help but feel a chill. There was no trace of guilt or hesitation in his demeanor, no sign of what had happened earlier. My mother smiled warmly and accepted his explanation without further question. She went into the kitchen to prepare dinner, as if everything was perfectly normal. She had no idea, no inkling of the dark undercurrent that had begun to haunt our home. But I knew. Everything about me had changed. I no longer looked at Damien in the same way. The man I had once tried to accept as part of my family now filled me with hatred, and yet, beneath that hatred, shame gnawed at my heart. Guilt. Since that day, it has followed me like a shadow, wrapping itself around my thoughts. I knew that nothing between Damien and myself could ever be the same again. Living under the same roof became unbearable. My shoulders were weighed down with fear and guilt, a never-ending torment that followed me everywhere I went. Family meals became a nightmare. Damien's gaze lingered on me far longer than it should. It was no longer a stepfather's look at his stepdaughter, but something darker, something that made my skin crawl. And my mother. She remained blissfully unaware. She continued to smile at him with the love and trust she had always shown, oblivious to the horror lurking beneath the surface. Every time I passed him, an invisible fear gripped my chest. I avoided his eyes, trying to ignore the unease that was boiling inside me. But it was there, always there. My mother's happiness only deepened my fear. Her beaming smile and confidence made me feel like a traitor. I wanted to speak, to share my pain, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't have the courage. The silence became my prison, and my thoughts tormented me endlessly. I knew I couldn't go on like this. Something had to change. I decided to leave. I told my mother it was time for me to move out and live on my own. I framed it as a step towards adulthood, a chance to gain independence. At first she was surprised, even shocked. "Why all of a sudden?" she asked, concern written all over her face. "You always wanted to stay close to me. You don't have to leave. Staying here is fine. Living alone can be dangerous." Her voice was full of concern, but I stood my ground. I told her that I needed to grow, to experience life. Reluctantly, she agreed, although I could see the questions in her eyes, the ones I couldn't answer. When I finally left the house, I expected relief. I thought the distance would free me from Damien's gaze and the memories that haunted me. But the pain didn't go away. It burned inside me, a constant reminder of what had happened. Still, it was a step towards freedom. Leaving was my way of protecting myself. It wasn't easy, but I knew I couldn't bear the oppressive fear and guilt any longer. Life has a way of throwing unexpected challenges at us, events we never imagined we would face. But how we respond to these moments defines who we are. My story has become a bitter lesson in vulnerability, guilt, and resilience. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, we must find the strength to carry on, no matter how broken we feel. I want to tell you something important. Never stay silent when you feel threatened or in danger, especially from those who should be protecting you. Silence may provide temporary relief and help you avoid conflict, but it can also become a prison, a place where pain and isolation grow. Always seek help, no matter who it's from. Talk to family, friends, or support organizations. Sometimes telling the truth is the only way to free yourself and start a new journey. Pay attention to your feelings. If you feel that your environment is no longer safe or comfortable, that's your cue to make a change. Choosing to leave is not about giving up. It's about protecting yourself and finding peace. For parents, I would say this: always pay attention to your children's feelings and behavior. Even small changes in attitude or ambiguous words can point to something deeper. Don't dismiss these signs. Understanding and paying attention can make children feel safe and supported. You may even be saving them from pain they're too afraid to express. Life is full of challenges, but we all have the right to choose how we face them. Be brave, be strong. You deserve to live a peaceful and happy life, free from fear and harm. This is the end of my story. Thank you for listening, goodbye, and I hope to see you again.